Hello, everyone. I'm Baika, and I'm the host of Global Educators. This is a show for parents and educators to come together and talk about how to create a safer place for the next generation and for our students and children. Here, we talk about neurodiversity, mental health awareness, and also a lot about emotional intelligence. And neurodiversity is also one main part of my passion, my personal passion that I'm super into, and I talk a lot often, quite often on this platform. Today's episode is about neurodiversity. And although I've talked about neurodiversity in my previous episodes, I'm not an expert. I'm just a advocate. I'm just someone who's passionate about it. But I do have an expert to give us more technical advice on in this area. Today's speaker is Dr. Matt. He's the founder of the Neurodiversity Collective. He's a lead psychologist, a keynote speaker, and author of Neurodiversity Playbook. First of all, thank you for coming on our show. And please share with us your mission and passion.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a real treat for me. So I'm Dr. Matt Zakreski. Everybody calls me Dr. Matt. I grew up as a neurodivergent person. I grew up as I was identified gifted in second grade, and I am diagnosed with ADHD in high school. And I've had sort of the entire gamut of the neurodivergent experience, but this was in the 80s and 90s before so much of this stuff was public, right? Public knowledge. So when I became a doctor, I was like, I want to work with people like me. I want to work with people with different brains and provide spaces and skills that are neurodivergent affirming, right? That you don't need to change who you are to work with me. In fact, I want to meet you where you're at and help you figure out how to make the world work for you because our brains are not built to navigate this world. 80% of the world's population is neurotypical. So the world is built for and by neurotypical people. And if we think about that, you know, it makes sense that the world is not built for us, right? Like there's no ill intent there, but we need to figure out then how do we build spaces and skills to navigate this world without selling ourselves out or burning ourselves out. So that's what our clinical practice and also the professional speaking and training that I do is all about is let's start with some knowledge about the brain and use that to build practical skills that anybody can use to make their lives better.
I love that. I love how you teach other people clinical strategies or like clinical advice, and that you've taken this turned this passion into a tool to help other people. Let's talk about teachers and administrators. How can they apply these tools in a classroom setting, and how can they assist students, individualized education?
What we want to do is we want to build systems that support these kids, which keeps us out of you've got 26 kids in your classroom and you're doing 26 lesson plans. No teacher can do that. That's unsustainable. So what we want to do is we want to build in areas where kids can play to their strengths and then get done if they need to get done or go deeper if they want to go deeper. So one simple strategy that I tell a lot of teachers to do is if we're doing an assessment of something, like let's say, we're doing a unit on all the countries in Africa, right? You can ask your students who feels more comfortable taking a test on this, a traditional test, who feels most comfortable writing a paper on this, and who feels most comfortable doing a presentation on this. So what you're getting there is you're getting to three different learning styles and three different ways of showing knowledge. We need our kids to show their knowledge, right? We need to show them to show what they learn, but not every kid wants to write a paper. Not every kid wants to take a chapter test. So that simple question diffuses the way of showing learning, which means the barrier to show that knowledge is lower and more kids can do it and do it well. These are those like straightforward, concrete strategies that any teacher can use, right? I also love to tell teachers if you have a kid who's taking a test, on the back page of that test, right? Is there anything you know about this topic that I didn't ask you? And let the kids write, draw, slam poetry, whatever they need to do, their knowledge. Because, when we do a test, we're always going to miss some stuff, right? There's no way to be that thorough. So maybe you've got a kid who's more interested in the fashion of World War II than the battles. So if that kid can write on the back piece of that paper, here's what they were wearing in London, Paris, Berlin, Rome, Zurich during World War II. I'm not saying that's like what was on the test, but it sure is interesting, right? And we want kids to demonstrate their knowledge through the lens of their interests, because that's how kids fall in love with learning and stay in love with learning.
I think I like that how you want to make them fall in love with learning and stay. I feel like that's important. First or 2 months they come in to a new school, you're happy, like recharged and excited because they've had a great summer break. And then they get major like burnouts around, I feel like around the end of first semester. And then it's like I'm doing everything I can. Everyone is doing everything that they can. And but still we're not giving what they actually need. But I think your simple strategy, I think I will also personally try it out and like asking questions at the end just to see like it could be like probably something really tiny that we're missing. Yeah, for teachers that are listening, just don't be hard on yourself and don't create 27 different lesson plans. That's like really hard when teachers are just more aware, or like if you're just a little bit more mindful, how can that be so much better, in a classroom? How can that be beneficial for teachers?
So one of the areas that I think is really underserved here is the idea that we have to understand who our kids are in order to teach them effectively. And this is important for a lot of reasons, but one of those reasons is something called the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error says that if I don't know you well, my default setting is to make the things you're doing a reflection of your personal logical character, who you are. So if you're late to my meeting and I don't know you, I'm like, oh, you didn't take this seriously. You're unprepared. You're unprofessional, right? If I get a kid in the classroom who's fidgety, right, and like can't sit still and tap, 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 I don't think this kid is a scatterbrain. This kid isn't taking this class seriously. But if I take the time to know you, to know this child, to know my partner, to know my colleague, the more I know, the more that's giving me context, right? Because what pushes back on the fundamental attribution error is meaningful context. I worked with a kid many years ago who had Tourette's syndrome, and that's a type of neurodivergence, right? He had a lot of vocal tics, and his vocal tic was clearing his throat. He would several times a classroom.
I
Now,
had a
the
student
teacher,
too.
yeah, right. And the teacher didn't know what Tourette's was. So she was screaming at this kid because she kept thinking he was trying to show her up, right? Like you're being disruptive on purpose. This kid can't control what he's doing. When I came in, I said, no, 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 no. He's got Tourette's. He can't control this. And she went, what's Tourette's? So she moved her focus of this is this kid's fault to this thing is going on with this kid, right? And then you watch the empathy explode in her overnight. And, you know, and this is the thing. And I always tell all teachers and parents this, and all my clients too, actually, neurodivergence is always context, but it's never an excuse. If you know this kid has ADHD or Tourette's or autism or whatever it is, it gives you meaningful context to intervene with them differently. It is not a get out of jail free card, right? I know this kid has Tourette's and he's going to clear his throat. That doesn't give him permission to like punch somebody next to him, right? So we're using that knowledge to frame our expectations and interventions for every kid we see, not just treating them as one size fits all.
Okay, you brought up so many wonderful points to do. It also like spoke to me. I had been teaching for 3 years already, and I'm like, oh, I'm pretty good at this, and I was pretty confident at this. But going into my fourth year of teaching, I had a student that would, make that sound, and I was like, I thought he hated me. I was like taking it personally. I thought he hated my class. But then one of the admin told me your classes were actually one of his favorite classes. I'm like,
Hmm.
what? That is, but I never yelled at him. But I just kind of took it on myself, and I was like, okay, he probably hates me. That's when the admin told me he has Tourette's, and that's the first time me hearing it. I was like, why didn't I know this in university? I feel like that should be like the first ever course in year one. Like
Uh-huh. Couldn't
mandatory
agree more.
for teachers who are not as good with classroom discipline, you know, how can they kind of draw the line between, like you said, context versus excuse? So, right, how could they, or any advice to young teachers?
So the best advice I can give young teachers is to be curious, not furious. So it is easy to see a kid's behavior as the reflection of the worst parts about a kid, right? They're entitled, they don't care, they can't work hard, they're disrespectful, blah, 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 blah. And listen, those things might be true. I can't tell you there aren't kids out there who are disrespectful and dysregulated and don't care about school. Sure, they exist. But Dr. Brad Johnson always says kids do as well as they can, right? So if you come into any conversation with the kid from the lens of this kid is doing as well as they can, then it helps you to be curious, not furious, because it's easy to get mad at a kid. It's hard to have the mental discipline to be curious because if we believe this kid wants to do well, and I genuinely speaking, I rarely meet people who don't want to do well. What a lot of people don't have are the skills to do well. And when you're thinking about neurodivergent people, you've got brains that have incredible strengths and sizable weaknesses that don't fit the expectations and paradigms of what these systems ask you to do. I mean, I can only speak to the American education system, though from what I know about yours, like I think it's similar. The American education system rewards compliance. Do you follow the rules? Did you do what I told you to do? Can you follow the directions and take the steps that I want you to take? It doesn't really reward creativity, thinking outside the box, passion, things that our neurodivergent learners are going to bring to the table. So if you've got a kid who wants to write a rock opera about the Great Wall of China, well, why wouldn't we let that kid do that, right? Like, well, it's like he's supposed to write a two-page paper on the Great Wall of China. Great. What would you rather listen to? 26 two-page papers on the Great Wall of China or one rock opera about the Great Wall of China? I know what I would rather listen to, right? So there's got to be room for creativity and depth and engagement. And the more we squeeze that out of education, it's our own fault that kids are more disengaged. They've got to put their spin on their mark, their personality. And this is where we get into the concept of universal design, right? Because the best practices in gifted and neurodivergent education are just the best practices in education. Every kid on planet Earth benefits from a passion interest-based model of learning. Every kid benefits from getting a choice in how they're assessed. So why would we close that off to some kids when all kids would benefit from it? So that's like part of our mission here at NDC is like, let's get that word out there so more people know what to do.
I totally agree. Because when I started looking at lesson plans online for neurodiversity kids, I'm like, oh, I can apply it to my everyday class. This is applicable to almost lots of different kinds of students. So I think, like you said earlier, like 80% of students are people are some sort of neurotype, right? Neurotypes. So I think the more that teachers are curious and the more we are able to diversify our lesson plans, it can be beneficial to anyone, right? So how can administrators, how can they support teachers or students?
We want to get more data. We want to learn how kids learn. The more we learn how kids learn, the more we put them in places to that will feed them best. It would be like if I asked you, let's go out to dinner, right? Now I could just arbitrarily decide we're going to get cheeseburgers. Do you want to have a cheeseburger? You might not, right? Right. But if I talk to you beforehand and say, like, hey, here are the four restaurants that are in this town. One of these would you like to eat at? You might say, oh, I'd really want to have fried chicken instead of a cheeseburger. Great. That saves me time and energy because we had a conversation, right? But you're going to put people in the best places based on taking the time to get data rather than just sort of like guessing. And I don't want you to have to guess. there's an expression, and I'm not sure if the idiom will translate, but an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Like the more work we do up front, the less work we have to do later. And teachers sometimes push back on that. They're like, I'm already doing so much work. I'm like, I know you are. But if you do this work early, then you're going to get to do a lot less work later. Because think of going back to that test example we used before, if you give kids options, yes, you have to ask those questions, and yes, you have to set up those different assessments, but it also means you don't have to grade all these terrible tests and do the feedback sessions and have the kids submit the redos and then grade those and do the grade books. That's exhausting. No teacher wants to do. That's not why we got into the field, right? So what we do instead is we pivot into a different space and we pivot into a conversation that's closer to um, okay, I took the time to ask these kids. I know what these kids want. I know what they need. I'm going to put them and me in a position for success.
I agree. I want to go back to the test, and there was one part you talked about compliance, and it's
Hmm.
you have to follow the rules. If you don't, you're a bad kid. It's like
Yeah.
automatically labeled as bad, destructive,
Yep.
disobedient. So there's so many words. Even up till now, I thought it was only like in my generation, but even I think a lot of schools are doing better these days, a lot better. Like it's not no, I'm lying. That's a lie. What is your advice for teachers to just, chill? Like, if they don't follow your direction, it's okay. It doesn't mean that they hate you or like don't pick a person. Like, what is like mental advice or advice for teachers to, you know, be a little bit more flexible when it comes to giving instructions?
Oh, well, so that's a great question, and we could spend a lot of time on this. One of the things that we see, and this is sort of a universal human psychology thing, is that when we feel stressed, we feel out of control. When we feel out of control, we seek to control whatever we can. A lot of times, it's easier to control little things than it is to control big things. Like, will this kid listen to me? That's a big thing. You know, am I a good teacher? That's a big thing. But like, Johnny's wearing white shoes and I told everybody to wear black shoes. That's a little thing. And when I control that control, I feel better, but I'm not actually dealing with the actual problem that I feel out of control, right? So you'll get teachers, I mean, and I've seen this in classrooms all over the world, teachers who are like, you're not sitting in your chair right. Who cares? Right? If the kid is getting the work done, I don't care, right? So it's one of those things like I ask teachers to say, what are your top three values as an educator? What are the things that really matter? You strip all the other stuff away. If we were teaching in a field somewhere, what would matter to you? And it's like, well, I want the kids to treat me with respect. I want the kids to engage in learning, and I want them to ask for help if they need it. Right? Those are good values, which means if the thing you're jumping in on to intervene on is not consistent with one of those three things, it's actually probably a waste of your time to try and do. Right? Like this is not a like I don't care how wide the straps on your shirt are. I don't care if you're in blue, pink, or green, or orange, or black, or magenta. I'm colorblind. I can't tell the difference. Like, these are the things. But like, we, because we feel so overwhelmed and out of control, we deal with that by doing these tiny little things that actually don't really matter. So give yourself permission to step out of that loop. And I think you'll feel a lot better.
I think that's a great advice. Thank you for that advice. Now let's talk about parents. How can parents help neurodiverse children?
There's a lot of information out there online that's very accessible. A lot of kids will go on TikTok or any of the other social media platforms. And it will be very easy to see kids who look like you, act like you. You're like, oh, do I have ADHD? Am I autistic? Do I have OCD? Those are great places to start the conversations. You really want to meet with a professional who can actually diagnose these things. You know, there are a lot of things that look like one thing but could actually be another. I cannot tell you how many times I've gotten a referral for a kid for ADHD, But when you get to know them, it's like, oh no, this isn't ADHD, it's this other thing. But because I'm sitting on a pile of knowledge, I can assess that. Versus somebody else might say something that's well intentioned but less informed, right? So, and it's also one of those things. I know there's still a lot of stigma around the labels that come from the mental health system, but let me speak directly to that to the parents for a second. So I mentioned I was identified gifted in second grade when I was 8 years old. I was identified with ADHD in high school when I was 16 years old. In those interim 8 years, I had a lot of labels. Those labels were like scattered brained, doesn't work to potential, disorganized, sloppy, immature. So I was getting labels anyway. I would rather that label a kid gets to be something that's grounded in science and has attached interventions to make it better. Because one of the things that's really challenging about being neurodivergent, especially if your neurodivergences are more subtle, is that everybody around you is a horse and you think you're a horse too, because you can do a lot of things that horses do. But it turns out you're actually a zebra. And if you put zebras around horses, they'll do okay. They're similar enough to horses that they'll be all right, but they won't be healthy. They won't be thriving. They'll just be surviving. When you put the label of a zebra on a zebra, it can go with the other zebras and run and eat and play and drink and do all the things it needs to do that are consistent with a zebra needs. So a lot of us out there are masking our zebra-ness because it feels easier and safer to be a horse. But if you're really going to thrive, you need the things that zebras need.
During that period of receiving a lot of labels, those are like unfair labels, right? That I think a lot of people, adults, are guilty of.
Yeah.
How did, what was going through your mind? Like, how did you feel when you were being labeled?
It's important to understand that it's a process. Like some people get diagnosed and they're like, yes, this explains everything. This is who I am. Finally, I know I have clarity. And some people struggle with it. And I always tell people I'm very open with my own journey. When I got diagnosed with ADHD, I cried. I was sobbed. I was like there was so much shame tied up in it because I really thought that I could just work harder, right? I had internalized that lesson of it must be my fault somehow. Your kid may not like it at first, but over time, you're going to be able to give them a new scaffold, a new structure to understand themselves, their behavior, their needs, their likes and their dislikes. And when you put that through the lens of there's this thing about your brain that's different, then it's no longer your fault as a person. It's this thing your brain does. And that psychologically is a really helpful shift.
Let's talk about adults who are
Yeah.
struggling with neurodiversity, or not, or if they feel like they need to hide or mask themselves. But I do have a message. Please don't mask yourself. Everyone is unique in their own ways. So I would say just embrace yourself. But what is your message to adults in a workplace? What is a message for the individual? How can they, protect themselves or speak up? How can they be their true version without feeling shameful or guilty?
It's never too late to be your true self, right? And that can be that interpret that however you'd like. But a big part of that is a lot of things that come with being neurodivergent show up negatively at work. But the adult generation right now, didn't get the same access to the same amount of psychoeducation and resource and advocacy that the children of this generation get. So a lot of adults are walking around right now with these same neurotypes, but they didn't get those access. They didn't get that access. So they're walking around not knowing. And it's amazing to me how often I assess a kid. And I'll be like, okay, well, you're gifted, you're ADHD, you're autistic, you've got all these things. Here's the resources to put you in the right direction. And then their parent will be like, yeah, do you think I might be any of those things? And I'm like, yes. Right. We call this apple tree syndrome because the apple never falls far from the tree. Right. So like now that I can assess that adult, and the adult's like, oh my gosh, I am also these things, right? we do that. Now the adults got that knowledge, and then the adult can put themselves in situations to be more successful. And to the adults out there hearing this, I'll say this. One of the biggest markers of being neurodivergent is that hard things are easy for us and easy things are hard for us. So if you're the person at work who they call when the machine breaks down, or you're the person at work who can come in and they get that client, make that sale, land the contract, do the legal case, whatever it is, but you don't remember to send in your emails on time, or you never clock into work, or you're always 7 minutes late to a meeting. Those are signs of being neurodivergent. And if we can identify that, then we can give you the tools and resources and strategies to make those things easier for yourself. Because why should you walk around carrying around that much pain? I don't want you to do that, right? So those little things can go a long way.
Like, because our mind becomes like a certain way by the age of
Mhm.
5, and it's really hard to change your
Yeah.
habits and way of thinking. And so, is there any way that we can adjust ourselves once we
Yeah.
reach like an adult level?
Mhm. Well, and I mean, that's the thing. It's like it may never go away, but like foundational to the neurodiversity movement is that differences aren't deficits. There's nothing wrong with us. We don't need to be fixed or cured, but we do need and deserve to be supported, right? And there's no amount of hard work or physical therapy I can do to make myself not colorblind, right? Like that's not a thing I can fix, but there are things I can do to minimize that problem in my life, right? So to all the neurodivergent people out there listening to this, you're not broken. There's nothing about you that needs to be fixed, but there are things about you that deserve to be supported. And the more we can understand that second piece, the better you're going to feel and the better you're going to do, right? So, you know, imagine that you are wearing that someone told you you have to wear a certain kind of pants, right? You've grown up your whole life having to wear these kind of pants. And the older you get, the less good the pants feel, but you don't know what other kind of pants are out there. So you just say, well, I got to keep wearing these pants, and you're miserable. Then someone says, hey, there's these other kind of pants. You can wear shorts. You can wear baggy pants. You can wear drawstring pants. You can wear a skirt or a dress or a bodysuit or a tuxedo or. And then when you realize there's this broad range of human experience, then then you can eat at that buffet and find the things that work best for you. You were never broken. You just had something that didn't fit.
What is your one last message to the people that are listening?
So the one last message I'd give you is that there's a common expression that knowledge is power. And I think that's true. But I think a better version of that sentence is knowledge is empowerment. The more you know about yourself, the more you can put yourself in the right situations with people, places, and activities that amplify the best things about you and support the things that you're not so good at. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen a brilliant, charismatic, wonderful person with their light under a bucket because they're in the wrong situation that doesn't play to their strengths. So if you know yourself, then you can say, wait a second, this isn't working for me. Let me go over here where I will be celebrated and supported and watch how high you can fly.
Thank you all for tuning in. That was Dr. Matt, and I'm your host, Rika. Goodbye until the next video.